The artillery fell like the wrath of God himself. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen crouched behind the battered hull of an Amtrak, feeling each 155 millimeters round shake the earth beneath his boots. The Marines of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment had been awake for 26 hours, stacked along the railroad tracks that marked Fallujah's northern boundary. In the pre-dawn darkness, their faces were ghost-pale under nods, eyes fixed on the city that had become the most dangerous place on earth. 30 seconds, came the voice over the radio. Calm, clinical, as if they weren't about to walk into a meat grinder. Chen checked his saw for the 4th time. Beside him, Lance Corporal DeMarco whispered a prayer his grandmother had taught him in Brooklyn, words that seemed desperately out of place in this landscape of rubble and rage. Further down the line, Corporal Johnson vomited quietly into dirt, then wiped his mouth and checked his magazine. Nobody made fun of him. They all felt it. The barrage had been going for 6 hours straight, the longest sustained bombardment since Vietnam. AC 130 Spectre gunships had turned entire city blocks into moonscapes. Precision-guided munitions had collapsed the minarets the insurgents used as sniper perches. The psychological warfare broadcast had stopped an hour ago, the Arabic warnings replaced by something far more terrifying. Silence broken only by explosions. Inside Fallujah, approximately 3,000 insurgents waited. Foreign fighters from Chechnya, Syria, Saudi Arabia. Fedayeen Saddam loyalists. Al-Qaeda jihadists who pledged themselves to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. They'd had 6 months to prepare, turning the city into a labyrinth of booby traps, IED networks, and interlocking fields of fire. They'd filmed themselves executing hostages. They'd posted videos online promising to turn the city into an American graveyard. They believed their own propaganda. 10 seconds. Chen's squad leader, Sergeant Ramirez, moved down the line with mechanical efficiency, making eye contact with each Marine. No speeches. No motivational bullshit. Just that look that said, "We're going together, and we're coming out together." The artillery ceased. For 3 heartbeats, the world hung suspended in an impossible quiet. Chen could hear his own breathing inside his Kevlar, the rustle of gear, the click of safeties coming off along the entire line. Then the voice cracked over every radio. All units, execute, execute, execute. The breach was a symphony of controlled chaos. Armored bulldozers lurched forward, their blades smashing to the earthen berms the insurgents had erected. AVs roared to life, their treads chewing dirt as they surged toward the city. The Marines moved in their wake, staying tight, weapons up, every sense screaming. Chen hit the berm running, and immediately dropped into a combat crouch. The city revealed itself in fragments, shattered buildings, streets cratered by airstrikes, power lines hanging like dead snakes. And everywhere, the smell, cordite, burning trash, sewage, and something else. Something older. Contact front. The first round snapped past Chen's head before his brain registered the muzzle flashes. An insurgent had popped up from a spider hole 50 meters out, AK chattering on full auto. Chen saw answer before conscious thought took over, the familiar buck and roar as he walked tracers into the target. The insurgent jerked and fell. But he wasn't alone. The street erupted. Muzzle flashes sparked from windows, rooftops, alleyways. RPG streaked across Chen's vision, trailing smoke. An AAV took a direct hit, the explosion lifting it partially off the ground before it crashed back down, still operational but trailing fire. Move, move, move. Ramirez's voice cut through the chaos. They bounded forward using every piece of cover. Burned-out cars, concrete barriers, the corpses of buildings. The insurgents had chosen their positions well, creating interlocking kill zones that forced the Marines to fight for every meter. But the Marines had something the insurgents didn't. Training so deeply ingrained it overrode fear, and firepower that could reduce a building to rubble in seconds. Chen's squad reached the first objective, a 2-story house marked on their maps as Structure 17. The door was already blown open, courtesy of a shoulder fire at 4. They stacked outside, each Marine's hands finding familiar positions on the man in front of them. Ramirez threw the flashbang. The concussion was physical even outside the building. Chen was third through the door, saw swinging to cover his sector. The room was a chaos of smoke and furniture. A figure moved in the corner. Chen's finger tensed on the trigger, and then froze. A woman, elderly, cowering behind an overturned table. Civilian! Civilian! Chen barked, weapon trained but not firing. DeMarco moved past him, speaking the Arabic phrases they drilled endlessly. Usket! Usket! Shut up! Shut up! But softer than it sounded, hands gesturing for her to stay down. Stay quiet, stay alive. The clearing continued, room by room. Stairwell. Second floor. Each corner a potential death sentence. They found weapons caches, propaganda materials, a laptop still displaying a half-finished martyrdom video. But no fighters. They'd already pulled back to the next offensive line. Outside, the battle had become general. The distinctive crack of M4S mixed with the deeper thump of AKs. A Marine machine gun team had set up in a courtyard, laying down suppressive fire that chewed chunks out of a minaret. An F-18 screamed overhead. So Lochin felt the jet wash. Then a building 3 blocks south simply ceased to exist in a thunderclap of dams. By 0600 hours, Kilo Company had pushed 2 blocks into Fallujah. They had another 60 blocks to go. Chun found cover behind a shot-up sedan and changed out his barrel. The metal so hot a hiss when he locked the new one in place. His hands worked automatically while his mind struggled to process what he'd just experienced. The intensity, the precision of the insurgent defenses, the realization that this wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be an extermination. Ramirez appeared beside him, face streaked with dust and sweat despite the November cold. "You good?" "Yeah, Sergeant. I'm good." "Stay that way." This was the easy part. Chen looked at the burning city stretching before them, at the tracers arcing through the smoke, at the shadows that might hide a sniper or an IED or nothing at all. The easy part. Jesus Christ. The radio crackled with reports from other units. Alpha Company had hit heavy resistance near the Jolin district. Lima Company had lost an AAV to a massive IED. Vehicle destroyed, crew alive but shaken. The insurgents weren't running. They were fighting for every building, every room, every goddamn doorway. But they were also dying. The Marines had brought overwhelming firepower and the will to use it. Tank rounds punched through walls. Javelin missiles turned hardened positions into craters. When the insurgents tried to mass for counterattacks, precision artillery scattered them into pieces. The city that was supposed to be their fortress was becoming their tomb, one building at a time. Chun watched the squad from 2nd Platoon breach a house across the street. The familiar rhythm. Flashbang entry, the staccato burst of gunfire, then silence. 2 Marines emerged dragging a wounded insurgent, his leg shattered, still spitting curses in Arabic. A corpsman ran over, not to the insurgent first, but to check the Marines. Only when he was satisfied his own people were okay did he turn to the enemy fighter, applying a tourniquet with the same professional efficiency. Why save him? DeMarco asked, watching. Because we're not them, Ramirez said simply. The sun was rising now, pale light filtering through the smoke that hung over Fallujah like a shroud. Chan could see the city properly for the first time, the full scope of what they'd walked into. Thousands of buildings, each one potentially hostile. Streets that twisted like a maze. The perfect urban battlefield for defenders. But the Marines kept pushing. At 0730, they received new orders. Continue the advance. Secure phase line Fran by 1200 hours. No halting. No consolidation. The plan was simple, brutal, effective. Keep moving forward until there was nowhere left for the insurgents to run. Chun hefted his saw and fell back into formation. Around him, the platoon moved with the confidence of men who'd survived the worst the city could throw at them and were still standing. They'd breached Fallujah. They'd taken casualties but held together. And they'd taught the insurgents the first lesson of many to come. The Marines hadn't come to occupy. They'd come to end this. The mosque had become a fortress. Captain James Hendricks studied it through his binoculars from the relative safety of a collapsed building 200 meters out. The Golden Mosque, they'd been calling it that since the first reconnaissance photos, dominated the Jolin district like a medieval castle. thick walls, reinforced positions, and according to Sergeant, somewhere between 40 and 70 insurgents holed up inside with enough ammunition to hold off an army. Or so they thought. "Sir, we've got movement on the northwest minaret," Lieutenant Torres reported, pointing. Spotter, probably calling adjustments. Hendricks lowered his binos and keyed his radio. "Havoc 6 to Reaper to 1. We have eyes on target building. Request immediate says, danger close." The response came back within seconds. An F-18 was already in the stack, loitering at 15,000 feet with a full combat load. The pilot's voice was young, calm, professional. "Reaper 2-1 copies. Mark target with IR strobe. Inbound in 90 seconds. What happened next was a masterclass in combined arms warfare. The IR strobe went active on the mosque's western wall. Marines pulled back to minimum safe distance, 200 meters for a 500-pound JDM, though everyone knew that in urban terrain, safe was a relative term. Hendricks watched his Marines move with practiced efficiency, each squad leader accounting for his people, everyone behind hard cover. The F-18 made its run from the south, barely visible against the pale sky. There was no dramatic dive, no Hollywood theatrics. Just a gray shape that seemed to pause, a dark object falling away. And then the pilot was already banking for altitude. The explosion turned the mosque into a volcano. The shockwave hit Hendricks even at 200 meters, a physical punch that rattled his teeth. The building seemed to lift slightly, then collapse inward like a house of cards. Secondary explosions followed, cook-offs on the ammunition inside, sending debris spiraling into the sky. When the dust began to settle, the Golden Mosque was a crater surrounded by rubble. "All units, advance and clear," Hendricks ordered. But clearing a destroyed building was almost harder than assaulting an intact one. The rubble created new hiding spots, new angles, new places for a dying insurgent to take one last shot. Hendricks' company moved forward in bounds, Marines scanning every shadow, every pile of concrete, every piece of twisted rebar. They found the first bodies 30 meters from the crater. Insurgents who tried to flee at the last second, caught in the blast radius. Then more bodies in the rubble itself, or pieces of bodies. The JDAM had done its work with brutal efficiency. Movement, movement. The shout came from 3rd Platoon's position. An insurgent had survived, buried in rubble but somehow still armed. He fired wildly. 3 quick rounds had zinged off concrete before Marines saw and ended him with a precise burst. Staff Sergeant Chen and his squad were part of the clearing operation, moving through the debris field with weapons up. The scene was apocalyptic. Twisted metal, shattered masonry, and everywhere the smell of explosives and death. Chen had seen combat before, but the sheer destructive power on display here was something different. This wasn't warfare. This was annihilation. "Sergeant Chen, we need your squad on the eastern approach." Ramirez called over the radio. Possible secondary position, 2 buildings down. They moved through streets that looked like something from World War II. Entire blocks reduced to rubble, buildings with their facades sheared off, exposing rooms like dollhouses. A child's toy lying in the street next to a spent RPG tube. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. The eastern approach turned out to be a 3-story apartment building, miraculously still standing amid the devastation. Intel suggested it was a weapons cache and possible IED factory, which meant it needed to be cleared room by room, floor by floor with maximum caution. Chen's squad stacked at the entrance while Corporal Vickers, their breach specialist, examined the door frame. After 30 seconds, he shook his head. "Wired. They've got pressure plates inside, probably connected to artillery shells. We breach this door, half the building comes down. Can you disarm it?" Ramirez asked. "Give him about 6 hours and an EOD team, maybe." "We don't have 6 hours." Ramirez made the call every squad leader dreaded. They'd go in through the wall. Specifically through the wall of the adjacent building, already cleared. Then through the shared interior wall, using shape charges. It would take longer, burn through their explosives, and still might trigger secondary devices. But it was the only play. 20 minutes later, they were inside. The apartment building's interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one potentially the last thing they'd ever see. Chen took point with his saw, DeMarco right behind him with an M4. They moved in near silence, communicating with hand signals, every sense hyper-alert. The first floor was empty. Abandoned civilian spaces, furniture, clothes, family photos on the walls, evidence of normal life interrupted by war. It made Chen's skin crawl more than finding weapons would have. The second floor was where things got complicated. They found the IED factory in what had once been a living room. Work tables covered with wire, detonators, artillery shells, bags of homemade explosives, instruction manuals in Arabic, and something that made Chen's blood freeze, diagrams showing U.S. patrol routes, vehicle types, vulnerable points on maps. "They've been studying us," DeMarco whispered. "Yeah," Chen replied, "and we've been studying them back." The third floor was where they found the fighters. The insurgents had heard them coming, impossible not to in a building this quiet, and had prepared an ambush. As Chen's boot hit the top stair, automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously. Rounds chewed through drywall, splintered wood, filled the air with dust and death. Chen didn't think. His training took over. He dropped flat, returning fire with the saw while screaming, "Contact!" Third floor. Behind him, Marines were already reacting. Some returning fire, others pulling back to cover positions. Someone calling for support. An RPG whooshed past Chen's head, so close he felt a displacement, and detonated in the stairwell below. The explosion was deafening in a confined space, but also told Chen something critical. These insurgents were trapped. They'd set up on the third floor with no escape route, betting everything on stopping the Marines at the stairs. It was a suicide position. Frag out. The grenades sailed into third-floor rooms, the explosions overlapping into one continuous roar. Chen was moving before the debris settled, charging up the remaining stairs with DeMarco and 2 more Marines right behind him. They hit the hallway firing, clearing corners, moving with a violence of action that gave the insurgents no time to reset. The first insurgent Chen saw was already wounded from the grenades, struggling to raise an AK. Chen's burst caught him center mass, dropping him instantly. To his right, DeMarco engaged 2 more fighters who'd been hiding in a bedroom. The firefight lasted maybe 10 seconds, a lifetime in an instant, and then it was over. Silence. 4 insurgents dead, 1 critically wounded, already being worked on by a corpsman who'd appeared like magic, and Chen's squad intact, though Vickers had taken shrapnel to his arm and was being bandaged up. Ramirez appeared, surveyed the scene, and nodded. "Good work. Mark this building clear, and let's move. We're behind schedule." Behind schedule. As if this was a construction project, instead of urban combat at its most brutal. But that was the mindset that was working. The Marines treated Fallujah like a problem to be solved, broken down into buildings, blocks, objectives. Each one cleared meant 1 less place for insurgents to hide. By 1400 hours, the Jolin district was effectively in Marine hands. The cost had been steep. 3 Marines Kia, 17 wounded, countless close calls. But the insurgent losses were catastrophic. Entire fighting positions wiped out. Command structures decapitated. And most importantly, the myth of Fallujah as an impregnable fortress was dying with every block taken. Chen sat on a pile of rubble, drinking water that tasted like dust, and watched the battle continue around him. To the south, tanks were engaging a hardened position. To the west, another airstrike was going in. The insurgents were still fighting, still dangerous, but something had changed. They weren't advancing anymore. They were just trying to survive, and the Marines weren't giving them that option. The intelligence report called it Objective Lion, a nondescript designation for a building that would become legendary in Marine Corps history. A 4-story apartment complex straddling a strategic intersection, heavily fortified, and according to human reports, housing a high-value target, a Chechen commander named Shamil who'd been coordinating the insurgent defense. First Lieutenant Sarah Vega studied the drone feed on a tablet, watching the building's thermal signature. Heat blooms everywhere. Multiple fighters, multiple firing positions, and something else. A hot spot in the basement that could be a generator or a bomb factory, or both. Ma'am, we got confirmation from Regimental. Her radio man reported. Objective Lion is priority Alpha. They want it taken before nightfall. Vega looked at the sky. They had maybe 90 minutes of usable daylight left. After that, the battle would shift to NVGs and thermals, giving advantages to defenders who knew every inch of their terrain. The timeline was tight, but it was doable if everything went perfectly. And nothing in Fallujah had gone perfectly yet. Her platoon, 2nd Platoon Lima Company, had been fighting for 11 hours straight. They were down to 31 Marines from the original 43. Not all casualties. Some had been pulled back for rest. Others detailed to guard captured insurgents. But 31 Marines to take a building intel said held 50-plus enemy fighters. The odds weren't good. All right, listen up. Vega gathered her squad leaders. We're not going in soft. First, we isolate the building. Squads on each corner. Nobody gets in or out. Second, we call steel on target. Tanks, direct fire, until that building looks like Swiss cheese. Third, we breach from two sides simultaneously. Clear bottom to top. What about civilians? Staff Sergeant Kowalski asked. According to the last census, this building should be empty. Everyone who was going to evacuate did so a week ago. Anyone still inside made their choice. It was a cold calculus, but necessary. They couldn't afford to hesitate, couldn't afford to second guess. The Marines who died that morning had died because insurgents used civilians as shields. The ones who survived were the ones who accepted the brutal math of urban warfare. The approach to Objective Lion took 40 minutes of careful maneuvering through streets that were now choked with debris and the detritus of battle. Vega's platoon moved in staggered columns, using every piece of cover, scanning windows and rooftops for the telltale glint of a sniper scope. They made it to within 200 meters before the insurgents opened fire. The ambush was well planned. PKM machine guns set up in overlapping fields of fire, RPGs held in reserve, snipers positioned to cover the kill zone. The first burst caught Lance Corporal Martinez in the legs, dropping him instantly. Before his screams could even register, the platoon was reacting. Suppress. Suppress. Kowalski was bellowing, his machine gun team already setting up to return fire. Vega was on the radio, calling for armor support, her voice cutting through the chaos with practiced calm. Havoc 6, this is Lima 2-6. We are taking effective fire from Objective Lion. Request immediate fire support. Over. The response was immediate. Two M1A1 Abrams tanks that had been holding a block south pivoted their turrets toward the building. The first round, a 120 millimeters heat round, punched through the building's second-floor wall and detonated inside. The explosion blew out windows and sent a geyser of smoke and debris skyward. The insurgent fire slackened momentarily, and Vega's Marines used a lull to drag Martinez to cover. The corpsman was already working on him. Tourniquet applied, morphine administered, calling for a case vac that wouldn't come for at least 30 minutes. The tanks fired again, and again, each round carefully targeted, based on where muzzle flashes had been observed. The building's facade began to disintegrate, revealing the reinforced interior the insurgents had constructed: sandbags, steel plates, concrete barriers. They've been planning this for months, Kowalski said, awe in his voice despite the circumstances. So have we, Vega replied. The armor barrage lasted 15 minutes. By the end, Objective Lion looked like it had been through an earthquake, but thermal imaging still showed multiple heat signatures inside. The insurgents were dug in deep, and they weren't surrendering. Vega made the call. We're going in. First squad on the north entrance. Second squad on the west. Third squad, you're our reserve and security. Kowalski, keep that machine gun talking. I want him thinking we're still outside when we're already in. The breach was a ballet of control violence. First squad hit their entry point with a breaching charge that blew the reinforced door off its hinges. They poured through the smoke, weapons up, clearing the ground floor with ruthless efficiency. Second squad went through a wall, using a vehicle-mounted mine plow to simply smash through the building's weakened western side. Vega went in with second squad, her M4 at the ready. The interior was a nightmare. hallways blocked with debris, rooms fortified into miniature bunkers, and everywhere the smell of propane, sewage, and death. An insurgent appeared from a doorway, AK raised, and Vega double-tapped him before a conscious mind even registered the threat. They found a first IED 30 seconds later, a cluster of mortar rounds wired to a pressure plate, concealed under rubble in a doorway. Corporal Jennings spotted it, called halt, and the entire squad froze while he carefully marked it with chem lights. They bypassed and let EOD handle it later. If there was a later. The stairwell to the second floor was a kill box. The insurgents had removed the stairs themselves and turned the vertical shaft into a shooting gallery. When first squad tried to advance, grenades rained down from above, forcing them back. 2 Marines wounded, one seriously. Vega switched tactics. We're not going up, we're going through. Using the schematics from the pre-mission brief, they identified load-bearing walls and non-load-bearing ones. Then they quite literally made their own staircase, using breaching charges to blow holes through the ceiling, then using grappling hooks and sheer upper body strength to pull themselves up to the second floor. It was exhausting, time-consuming, and completely unexpected by the insurgents. Second squad emerged on the second floor, behind the main defensive positions. The insurgents were facing the stairwell, weapons trained on an approach that would never come. When Vega's Marines opened fire from behind, the result was devastating. The firefight was short, brutal, and one-sided. 8 insurgents died in the first 30 seconds. 3 more were wounded and captured. The rest retreated further into the building's maze. But retreat was no longer an option for them. The Marines were inside now, and they moved through the building like a slow-motion explosion, room by room, floor by floor, using grenades, shaped charges, overwhelming firepower. Every piece of resistance crushed systematically. They found the command post on the 3rd floor, maps, radio equipment, tactical plans written in Arabic, evidence of sophisticated operation, coordinated across multiple cells. And they found Shamil. The Chechen commander was in a reinforced room that had taken a direct hit from one of the tank rounds. He was already dead, killed by the blast, his body partially buried in rubble. Next to him was a laptop, miraculously intact, that would later yield intelligence on insurgent networks across Iraq. The top floor was the hardest. The remaining insurgents, maybe 15 of them, had barricaded themselves in a cluster of apartments, interconnected through holes smashed in walls. They created a final redoubt, a place to make their last stand. Vega didn't give them the martyrdom they wanted. Instead of direct assault, she called in another precision strike. Not from the air this time, but from the Abrams tanks still positioned outside. The tankers had a clear angle on the 4th floor, and their sabot rounds went through the building's walls like tissue paper. After the barrage, thermal imaging showed no movement on the 4th floor. Sending a squad confirmed, Vega ordered. The confirmation team found 12 bodies, all killed by the tank fire or the resulting structural collapse. No wounded, no prisoners from this group. They'd chosen to fight to the death, and the Marines had obliged them. By 1945 hours, objective line was secure. The cost, for Marines wounded none critically, 37 insurgents Kia, 1 HVT eliminated, and a strategic intersection now firmly in American hands. As Vega walked out of the building, stepping over rubble and spent brass, she saw her Marines, exhausted, filthy, some wounded, but alive and victorious. Staff Sergeant Chen was there, his saw still smoking from the day's fighting. He caught Vega's eye and nodded, a simple gesture of professional respect between warriors. "Good work today, Marines," Vega said simply. "Rest and refit. We're not done yet." But something had shifted in Fallujah. The insurgents had thrown everything they had at the Marines. Ambushes, IEDs, suicide attacks, urban defenses. And the Marines had just kept coming, kept fighting, kept taking ground. The city was no longer the insurgents' fortress. It was becoming their grave. The battlefield had gone quiet. Not silent. There were still sporadic firefights in the southern districts, still the occasional crack of a sniper round, still the rumble of armor moving through streets. But the sustained, intense combat that defined the first 6 days had ebbed. The insurgents were no longer mounting coordinated defenses. They were surviving in pockets, isolated, cut off, dying. Colonel Michael Shoup stood in the Tactical Operations Center, studying the digital map of Fallujah. Blue icons, friendly forces, dominated the display. Red icons, known enemy positions, had dwindled to scattered clusters, mostly in the southern industrial district and around the Euphrates River. "Sir, we have confirmation from all battalion commanders," his operations officer reported. 90% of the city is under our control. Remaining resistance is fragmented and disorganized. Shoup nodded, but his expression remained grim. 90% meant victory by any military metric. But that last 10% would be the hardest. Cornered fighters were the most dangerous. And somewhere in that remaining territory were the true believers, the foreign fighters who'd come to Fallujah explicitly to kill Americans and die in the process. They were about to get their wish. Staff Sergeant Chen and what remained of Kilo Company were tasked with clearing a cluster of industrial buildings near the river. 7 days of continuous combat had whittled the company down from 180 Marines to 142. Some were casualties, medevac to field hospitals, or worse. Others were simply too exhausted to continue, their bodies finally giving out after a week of adrenaline, fear, and violence. Chen felt ancient. He was 26 years old, and he felt ancient. The industrial district was different from the residential areas they'd been fighting through. Larger buildings, more open spaces, fewer civilians, also fewer hiding places, which should have been an advantage. But the insurgents here had adapted, using the warehouses and factories to set up elaborate defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. Movement, 200 meters, second warehouse. DeMarco called out. I pressed his rifle's ACOG scope. Chen raised his binoculars. Through the haze of smoke that perpetually hung over the city, he could make out figures moving between buildings. Not the panicked flight of defeated fighters, but deliberate, tactical movement. They're repositioning, Chen said, setting up for an ambush. Ramirez, now the acting platoon sergeant after their lieutenant had been wounded on day 4, made the call. We're not playing their game. Kowalski, get your team up here. We're putting a javelin through that warehouse before we get anywhere near it. The javelin missile struck the warehouse with surgical precision, the top attack profile, sending the warhead through the roof. The secondary explosions that followed, multiple ammunition cook-offs, suggested they'd hit an insurgent supply cache. A good kill, but it also meant the remaining fighters would be even more desperate. They advanced through streets that looked post-apocalyptic. Entire blocks reduced to rubble, burned-out vehicles, bodies that nobody had time to collect, covered with ponchos or left where they'd fallen. The smell was overwhelming. Cordite, burning plastic decomposition, all mixed into a miasma that made breathing through anything but a dust mask nearly impossible. The next warehouse was where things went sideways. The building appeared empty on thermal scan. No heat signatures, no movement. Standard procedure dictated they clear it anyway. Insurgents had learned to mask their thermal signatures using cold water, wet blankets, even hiding in refrigerators or freezers. Chen's squad was third through the door. The first 2 squads had already cleared the ground floor and were ascending to the offices on the second level when the world exploded. The IED was massive. Later estimates put it over 200 pounds of homemade explosives, triggered remotely when the maximum number of Marines were inside the kill zone. The blast brought down a section of the second floor, burying Marines under concrete and steel. Chun, still on the ground floor, was thrown 15 feet by the concussion. His ears rang, his vision swam, but training kicked in even through the disorientation. He keyed his radio, calling for CASEVAC, for engineers, for help. Then the shooting started. The insurgents had planned it perfectly. Lure the Marines into building, detonate the IED, then assault the survivors while they were confused and wounded. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the warehouse, pinning down the Marines who weren't trapped in the collapse. Chen saw was across the room, buried under debris. He scrambled for it, rounds snapping overhead, and came up firing. The familiar weight, the steady rhythm of the weapon, gave him something to focus on beyond the chaos. Marines trapped. We have Marines trapped, someone was screaming into the radio. The next 20 minutes were among the longest of Chen's life. Half his attention was on returning fire, suppressing the insurgent positions. The other half was on his brothers, trapped under rubble, some screaming, some ominously silent. The cavalry arrived in the form of an M1A1 Abrams tank that simply drove through a warehouse wall to reach them. The tank's presence was enough to break the insurgent assault. They couldn't penetrate its armor with small arms, and when the 120mm main gun spoke, entire buildings ceased to exist. Behind the tank came combat engineers with cutting equipment and a medical team. They worked with desperate efficiency, lifting concrete slabs, cutting through rebar, extracting Marines one by one. 4 dead, 9 wounded, including Ramirez, who'd taken shrapnel to the chest and was unconscious by the time they pulled him out. Chen sat on the floor of the warehouse, hands shaking as the adrenaline ebbed, and watched the corpsmen work. One of the dead was DeMarco, the kid from Brooklyn who prayed before every mission. He'd been crushed when the ceiling came down, death probably instantaneous. Chen wanted to feel something, grief, rage, anything. But there was just numbness, a void where emotion should be. Staff Sergeant Chen, a captain he didn't recognize, was standing over him. "I need you to pull it together. We're not done here. Sir, I know what you just went through, but we have 30 more buildings to clear before nightfall, and I'm down 2 squad leaders. Can you do this?" Chen looked at his remaining Marines, 6 of them out of the original 13, all looking at him, waiting for orders, waiting for leadership. "Yeah," Chen heard himself say, "we can do this." The clearing continued through the afternoon, building by building, each one potentially another trap, another ambush, another casualty report. But the Marines had learned. They used drones to scout buildings before entry. They called in precision strikes on anything that looked suspicious. They moved with a cold, methodical efficiency that gave the insurgents no opportunity to set elaborate traps. By 1700 hours, the industrial district was secure. By 1900 hours, organized resistance in Fallujah had effectively ceased. Small firefights would continue for another 2 days as Marines hunted down the last holdouts. EOD teams would spend weeks clearing the thousands of IEDs scattered throughout the city, and the political aftermath would reverberate for years. But the Second Battle of Fallujah, Operation Phantom Fury, Al-Far, was over. The Marines had taken a city that insurgents swore would be an American graveyard. They'd fought through ambushes, IEDs, suicide attacks, and the most intensive urban combat since Hugh City in 1968. They'd lost 95 Americans killed and over 560 wounded. The insurgent losses were catastrophic. Over 1,400 confirmed dead, countless more buried in rubble or fled into the desert to die. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen sat on the hood of a Humvee as the sun set over Fallujah on day 7, watching smoke rise from a dozen fires across the city. His saw rested across his knees, barrel finally cool after a week of near-constant firing. Lieutenant Vega appeared, her own uniform torn and filthy, a bandage on her left arm from a wound she probably didn't even remember receiving. "How you holding up, Chen?" "Still breathing, ma'am." "That counts for something." She sat down beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. What was there to say? They'd survived something that would mark them forever, change them in ways they were only beginning to understand. "You know what the insurgents got wrong?" Vega said finally. "They thought dying for their cause made them strong. They thought sacrifice was victory. And we didn't come here to die for our country. We came here to make the other poor bastards die for theirs." She paused and added, "Patton said that. Seems appropriate." Chen nodded. Across the city, he could see other Marines, dirty, exhausted, victorious. They'd accomplished something extraordinary, something that would be studied in war colleges for decades. They'd proven that determination, training, and the willingness to pay the price could overcome any defense. The insurgents had made Fallujah their fortress. The Marines made it their grave. As night fell over the city, the battle's final irony became clear. The insurgents had been right about one thing. Fallujah would be remembered, but not as the place where American resolve broke. It would be remembered as a place where it was proven unbreakable.